Welcome to SIG Apps. It's May 1st, 2017. I'm Michelle. I'm going to lead the meeting today. If you are interested in taking notes during the meeting, please do so on the public Google Doc. First up, we have a demo by Alex. I think it's Rivera, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, Rivera.
Awesome. So Alex, go ahead and show us what you got. Alex is going to be demoing Armada. Go ahead.
Hello, everybody. I'm Alex Rivera. I'm the lead developer for Armada. So Armada is a multi-deployment chart tool driven by data templates, in our instance, YAMLs. What we wanted to do with Armada is to enhance our Helm experience by being able to predefine multiple charts prior to deployments and be able to drive those deployments via either a local directory or a Git repo. And how we would instantiate, how we would deploy this also is through either a CLI or an API endpoint. So to show off first, Armada is still very much using the Helm tiller. So we need to make sure that prior to deploying anything, we need to make sure that our tiller is up and running. So to demonstrate the Armada API, we can see that our tiller server is active. And to show you a little bit about on the Armada CLI, since it's a little bit more advanced right now, I want to go through a simple deployment. What we'll be deploying today is OpenStack Helm, since it's a chart is a project that I know that needs chart dependency.
Would you mind increasing the size of your font? Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. So how we define an Armada chart is via just providing a YAML with the Armada key name and the Armada and a release prefix. The release prefix is how Armada is able to determine which charts to manage once we've deployed them. And how we define charts afterwards is just through an array of objects in YAML, charts with the namespaces, releases, and the name. And we can also have overriding values. And one of the things that we really like is the ability to be able to build these charts via Git. So we have our Git locations here, and this is how we build them. If charts need dependencies, all we need to do is define them under the dependencies key name here. So the MariaDB has a dependency on our Helm toolkit, and that is pretty much it. And you just define all the other charts and dependencies as needed.
One reason why we did this too is because the dependency is handled by Helm today. If I have, let's say, multiple applications or Kubernetes manifests that rely on, let's say, MariaDB, we didn't want several instances of MariaDB, we wanted Armada to handle that dependency a little bit better. So, for instance, in our case, we can deploy either multiple MariaDBs or we can use a single MariaDB in separate namespaces. And so to avoid those collisions, that's one of the reasons why we went with developing landscape or Armada.
Correct. So just to take you through a simple deployment, all you have to do is Armada and pass it in the YAML. And as you can see, we're extracting the charts via the Git and deploying them into our pillar. So you can see the Armada release prefix is attached to every release. So that tells us which ones are going to get managed by us. And and as we can see that the OpenStack Helm is deploying. If we were to want to modify the chart and say we just want to change the rabbit to actually have only one replica instead of two, all we need to do is just modify the values and just redeploy. You can see here that if there are no changes to either the Git repository or the values files, we don't actually deploy. So we prevent any deploys that doesn't meet either a difference in the repo or in the values. And we can see here that there was a difference in the rabbit, and we were able to redeploy it. And as we can see, changes have been made to the rabbit. Now we only have one. And the last feature that I want to show off is the if you don't if one day you were to say that we don't want to chart, we don't want to manage a chart anymore just because of an outdate or what have you, you can actually go into your YAML definition, remove the chart, and all we need to do is enable chart cleanup. And it will actually remove the horizon chart for this instance.
So what's nice about this too is during, let's say, upgrades, or if you're removing a chart, it'll also remove and clean up all the jobs as well. And that was one thing we really needed out of Helm, because there's a lot of job dependencies in OpenStack. And Helm Toolkit, if you guys saw that really quickly, Helm Toolkit is basically, it's not really making a deployment so much as it's a set of functions to enable the jobs for, let's say, creating a DB user or creating an endpoint. So that's really our only dependency. So in some ways we're not using the dependency logic that charts would, or that Helm would use, but we do have a dependency on this function logic. And so that's the dependency that we created, and that's that's the heavy use of Armada.
And we can see that now the horizon release has been removed, and that the horizon is actually no longer in the namespace. That is Armada as it is right now, and hope you like the demo. Brendan, do you have any last minute? Anything else to say?
Well, I guess we can take some questions. We tried to be really brief on the call, so I tried to keep it within about 10 minutes or whatnot. Does anybody have any questions or?
I have a question if nobody else is asking.
Sure.
Can you hear me? So It was also on the chat. I didn't ask on the chat, but someone else asked on the chat. They said, do you redeploy when you update the replica count, or do you just upgrade the service?
It's hard to hear. There's a lot of background noise. What
Right.
was the question again?
You're not speaking. Could you mute?
Thanks. So my question was, you updated the replica count, and you said the app gets redeployed. Does it actually get redeployed, or do you just upgrade the service? Or,
Yeah, that's a great question. So, Alex, you want to explain the logic for that, or do you want me to kind of cover what the goal would be?
I think covering the goal would be best.
Okay, so the goal, this really stemmed with a project that we're doing, which is OpenStack Helm. So OpenStack is an extremely complex application, as many of you know. And we wanted to use Helm for the deployment and lifecycle throughout. To do that, what we're doing is we're doing a tuple and running that through a hash. So each time, let's say there's a config change in the etc directory, essentially, what we're doing is we're noticing that hash would change, and we're redeploying. I think Armada is following the same logic. One of the things, and I just noticed this myself, is that the deployments seem to redeploy. And so I think we need to look at that a little bit more. Armada is, I think, it's only been out a couple months, right, Alex?
Yeah, we're still in release 0.2.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, this is really, really new, and we're looking for more help from the community because we think it would have wider adoption and more use cases.
right.
But that's something that we're going to have to look at because we obviously don't want to disrupt the pods that are actually standing.
Actually, redeploying has some benefits. For example, if you upgrade, you can only change replica size and image name for a deployment. But by redeploying, you can change labels. You can do a lot of other stuff. So
that's actually the goal, is to redeploy. That's why we're doing the hash across the deployments for any changes in what would be etc, and in bin as well. If you look at the project, but I want to make sure that we don't actually lose things as well, because it looked like we were in a state where there was 0 replicas too, and I don't want that. So,
right, I understand. Thank you. It was a great answer.
Yeah, so I mean, hopefully you guys find a little bit of additional use. I mean, Matt, I see that you're on here. Originally, we wanted some of these features in Helm, but we don't want to be disrupted to Helm as well. It'd be nice to see some of these things in there, but if you'd rather us go down the plugin route or this way, right now we're kind of headed towards an API route. Everything is CLI driven, so Alex was working inside of a container for now, but that will end up being driven by an API that would be either in a federated model or next to Tiller.
Yeah, that was a really cool demo. I haven't seen this since its very, very early days, so it's been exciting to see you guys make a lot of progress on that. And at some point, but what I just saw was, oh, I need to go back and look and see if there are a lot of things that do make sense to bubble back up to Helm. But I see why it makes a lot of sense as a separate tool that can really specialize and meet cases like the OpenStack case, where the charts are just unbelievably complex unless you do something to manage that complexity.
Yeah, definitely. Two things to note for us anyways was the Git driven aspect, which we've talked about before, right? The other was cleaning up jobs. You know, you end up with all these jobs everywhere, and we need to clean those up when we do redeploys and so forth. So those were two of the big drivers.
Yeah, and that second one is one we've had fits and starts trying to figure out a good way to do it. So that's one that might make a lot of sense.
That'd be cool. Yeah, let us know if there's some features that you'd like to see in Helm or whatnot. Right now, it's written in Python. We had discussed writing in Go. We just have a lot of Python experience in our group since we're an OpenStack group, obviously. So, but if we needed to do that, or if if you want to talk a little bit further about that, then please let me know. But thanks for the time, guys.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, so if there are no other questions, then we'll move on to our discussion topic, or discussion topics. So the first one is about the proposal to move things in the examples directory in the main Kubernetes repo to its own examples repo. So Emeth, are you here to talk about that? And did I pronounce your name correctly?
I'm here to talk about that. So I assume that this is not going to be particularly interesting for a lot of people, so I'll try to keep it short. Let me probably just start sharing my screen quickly, as well as I'd like to send the proposal link to the chat. Not sure how I do that while I'm sharing my screen, but can you see my screen right now?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So the problems with examples directory is that, so this directory in the main repository is, it has a lot of examples. Most of them are belonging to third-party ecosystem software like OMS or Spark, or in the storage directory especially. There are a lot of storage examples here, which are not particularly relevant to the main repository. And the problem with those things are in most of the cases, we don't have clear ownership for those, and they have not been maintained for a very long time. So ideally, we would like to move some of these out. So the proposal I sent out basically suggests that we should get rid of the third-party examples gracefully. We should encourage the maintainers of these examples to create their own repositories to maintain their own Kubernetes examples, and possibly create Helm charts and serve them as the examples to the community. And some of them are just out of date, so I think we're better off just cleaning them up. And we have some maintained examples here. If I scroll all the way down, we have some examples like Guestbook, WordPress, and Cassandra. They're basically showcasing various features of Kubernetes, and they have different complexity levels, and we can extend these examples. But the thing is that these are the canonical set of examples we maintain from version to version, and we make sure that these actually work, and some of them are actually used in the test suite and tested thoroughly. But the thing is that some examples, the rest of the examples here are not tested at all, and some of them are actually causing continuous test failures for the past 6 months, really. So that's a little bit of a problem. For that, we actually created a repository called Kubernetes /examples. So we're planning to move those there. So I really appreciate your comments. Similarly, we have a similar repository called Contrib, and this is kind of also turned into a dumpster of examples that people just, they have a software, they want to show how it works on Kubernetes, so they just sent a PR here back in the day. And some examples in both repositories actually are kind of documentation, like the volume plugins, for instance. They actually, if I click volumes here, you're gonna see that this is actually like the reference documentation sort of how it is used. If I click on something random, I'll see that these are the fields that I should be providing, and so on. So I think these should ideally live under the documentation website. So probably we'll move those to the documentation repository over time. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I have a exhaustive list of examples here and what I think of them. It's basically like, for instance, it's a Park example is kind of out of date, and it's third parties, so we should probably get rid of this. But there are some maintained examples and so on. So if you have any opinions on this topic, please chime in. I really appreciate help. So I'm still trying to figure out what to do with all these things, but most likely most of these will go away, and I don't want to just delete them. We should totally make it graceful. That's pretty much it.
Awesome. Thanks for your time. Does anybody have any questions on that?
I've got a comment on this. We've been thinking about this within my circle of coworkers, and we had a problem. I want to find out if it's the same. We want to write like canonical examples of how to run complex systems like Kafka, for example, which is a pretty tricky Kubernetes integration. And we don't think the Helm charts repository is the right place for all the Docker files and like Go code that makes the init containers that bind everything together. And so we were thinking we needed a new place to keep that. And one thought we had was actually create an entirely new org, because that makes better use of GitHub's ACL system, so that you can have repos with very small numbers of owners in them rather than having like per directory ownership. I was wondering if you think these two use cases can be merged, and if you thought about using a new org rather than a new repo.
So I think I'm trying to think if we can actually merge it. So the set of maintained examples here actually serve a documentation purpose, and they actually walk the user through, how to run, I don't know, WordPress and MySQL on a persistent disk on Kubernetes step by step. So Kafka probably would be more complicated, but if you think that we can make it a walkthrough, because ideally the plan is to actually move these to the website. Basically, we have a samples. Let me pull that in, docs, samples. So basically, we have a section on the website that says samples, and these samples are actually just going to GitHub right now, and there are just a bunch of things on the left, and these are the also unmaintained stuff. So the goal here that I am trying to achieve is make sure that we have a maintained and tested set of examples from release to release, and they don't break. And this is how we teach Kubernetes to other people in terms of solid projects that actually work. Kafka is great. It's just like it's a complicated system. But the thing is that if you're not planning to maintain, and if there's a lot of overlap with, let's say, Cassandra, there might not be necessarily a lot of value in maintaining both. But if you think we should totally have Kafka, then we can totally have a organization, create a repository in there just for Kafka, and just maintain the example there. I'm not too concerned about where the existing code should go. We can shuffle things around, but if you have strong opinions, please chime in. But mainly the thing is that right now it's a management hell, and we should get rid of that.
Yeah, I guess sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I want to understand what example means, because one case is like, I want to learn Kubernetes, so I'm going to use an example of an app that's not the app I actually want to run, but it teaches me something. Another case is like, I know I want to run this particular app on Kubernetes, and I want the community's best practices to be distilled. I'll probably fork it and edit it, but I still just want to watch that. Like any updates or security things that happen to that, I want to see that stream only, because I just care about this one app. And I wonder if we want to distinguish those cases.
So the latter case you described, wouldn't it be a better fit for Helm in general?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because I'm trying to understand who it's for and what the intent is. And if it's we're going to take something and follow its upstream, and that's almost really treating it like a package, and you want a package manager for that. Or is it an example meant to teach somebody how to go do something? Those two different contexts, I think, matter here, and maybe where some of the confusion is. Like when I go look at the examples, I'm thinking this is an example. This isn't something I should just necessarily grab and use. It's meant to teach me. Or is it meant to be something I should just grab and use? But then what do I do after the fact?
So I'm actually thinking about it as a third case, I guess. It could be two things. One is some people might choose to use something like the kube syncer rather than Helm, where they just take config that's untemplated, fork it into their version control, and manually template it. Some people prefer that style. The other option is this can be a downstream. It can be you can have the Helm chart be downstream from this. What I noticed with Helm charts is the focus is like on ease of use. So some people prefer to just tell me what the values are and I'll plug them in and go and I'm good. Other people want to really get into it, understand it, and tweak it, which YAML doesn't really give you the power to do. And when we worked with Helm, we saw we needed 100 different values and values. With Kafka on Helm, was that we end up having tons of values. We know most people don't want to modify all those. And so there was something to be said for having an untemplated config and then just having people figure out what they want to change.
I guess that makes sense. So the audience of the samples is that, you know, I want to deploy this thing, but I don't really want to run it. I'd expect that it's not production grade. I'm just trying to learn how the Kubernetes concepts fit together. How can I use secrets within my deployment? How can I, you know, create stateful sets and stuff like that? So I think that is the main goal of the samples. And it's not meant to be like, this is how I run Elasticsearch or Kafka. This is how you should be running it. And this is guaranteed that we're going to update it or anything like that. Because that operation doesn't seem to scale, but there might be third-party repositories. As you said, could be an organization, could be somewhere else, or could be just some person's repository that they maintain. But Helm will be a better packaging solution, at least in general. But yeah, you're right.
So, sorry, what I was going to ask is, what about in the documentation, just having a tag of like, hey, this has been tested on this version of Kubernetes. The onus is on the maintainers of that specific example to update that or not. And it's because I found these are very helpful for actually both, like, it's all three now of the use cases that we've spoke about here. That it's helpful. I think these are very helpful to new people in Kubernetes, and it's especially helpful for them to be easily found. But they don't necessarily need to be constantly updated for the latest version to show all. Not every example has to show every feature in Kubernetes, right? And it might just be helpful in the documentation to have a little tag or some sort of note that this has been tested in 1.6, and these are the primary features that this example uses within Kubernetes.
Yep, that's the main goal, basically. You know, I just, let's say I just, you know, read the introduction documentation. I did the interactive tutorial. Now I want to actually bring up something myself. So I can just go here and click the guest book on Redis. I can follow this tutorial. This is basically just a service that has, you know, it has inter-service communication. It tells you about that. It tells you about a little bit of the persistent disks and how can you use secrets and environment variables and so on. So that's basically the way I actually like to see the scope of the example. Not like anything real, anything serious, telling you this is how you should be running everything, but close to production ready as much as possible, but not necessarily production ready that you should deploy in your company.
So I have a question. All right, so I'm looking at an example in particular off of this tutorials, the Storm one. What's the criteria for moving something into the examples?
Into the existing directory?
Well, off of the tutorials under big data, under samples, you've got Spark and Storm, right, on the website. And that links over to
GitHub.
Kubernetes example Storm.
Yep.
But I don't see what, like, I'm not sure I get what am I supposed to be learning from this example, for instance? Well,
so today is, the thing we're trying to fix is basically that problem that as a person who just learned about Kubernetes, by clicking Storm here, I actually don't learn a lot other than the fact that this is how I guess how I run Zookeeper on Kubernetes, but it doesn't explain me what what a deployment is or what a service is. It's just like, it's telling me that, okay, there are these YAML files or JSON files, you should just apply them and it'll work. That's kind of what it tells me, and that's not very ideal.
My thing about it is, so I would say that a lot of the things it's demonstrating in terms of how to run Zookeeper are probably not the best way you would want to demonstrate that. And the way Storm is being deployed here is probably not the best way to run Storm on Kubernetes. And I don't see like there's no examples coming out of this where I'm actually learning something about Kubernetes. I mean, it's like a bunch of pods and a replication controller, and it's not even like calling out, here's how you use a replication controller, or like I don't feel like I take anything away from this in terms of how to better use Kubernetes.
Exactly. That's why we should take them out, basically.
Okay.
So I think and maybe we're all agreeing, I think the use case, the set of people who are the best at teaching people how to come up that learning curve on Kubernetes is not the same as a set of people who have the most experience with running a single app in production on Kubernetes. And so and organizations and repos center around people that have experiences. So it seems like teaching examples and like fork this and run in production things should be separate places. But I think using an org makes sense. If you think you're going to have a bunch of different contributors that have different specializations, then you probably want to use an org. I'm pretty sure that's the case for like production config. I don't know if that's the case for examples or not.
I don't see a lot of value actually for education examples to be in an org necessarily or in separate repos, because we have only a few of them, and we intend to keep only a few of them because we just want to make it tractable. As a beginner, I can follow 3 tutorials, but not 15 tutorials probably, and we can't maintain 15 tutorials simultaneously at the same time. There's that too. So I think we can keep the examples in a single repository, and for the rest, we can create an organization as you described, and probably encourage people to move things over there. That will be a good move, I think.
So who is the examples for then?
It's for beginners who are trying to learn how can I write a YAML file? Where can I find some YAML manifests or stuff like that?
And do we
so,
think,
go ahead.
If we're going to do it that way, I think we need to maybe up the standard a little bit on what an example looks like, and make sure that like when people are looking at these examples, it's calling out what they're supposed to be learning, what they're supposed to be taking away.
Exactly. So there is actually the guidelines under the examples directory, which only the maintained examples follow, and the rest just doesn't follow that. So it actually says what is an example and what is not here. But I assume that this is probably a little bit out of date, as basically this says that examples should have a clear section saying this is what you're going to learn, and it's going to walk you through all these steps. It's going to explain and link to the concepts along the way, and it's going to tell you how to clean things up and stuff like that. So it has a pretty actually well-defined format, even though nobody's following it today.
Yeah, the examples today show a little bit more like, this is my product I want to showcase off here.
Exactly.
Rather than you're a user who wants to learn something, here's an example that teaches you about that. And so if that's the intent, then this section probably needs to be overhauled.
Yep.
I think whether we do org or repo, there needs to be a sense of a top-level owner whose focuses on quality and making sure things meet the guidelines from the beginning. Yeah, so that once we do this cleanup, which I'm excited about, that it stays cleanish.
The problem with what I see with the org is that, let's say we have an example of, I don't know, I'll just click storage and then pick on Hazelcast. If this is not being updated, if it doesn't have a maintainer, the org does not solve that problem. We'll still have examples that do not meet the quality in the first place. I mean, we can reject the examples that don't meet the bar in the first place, but that doesn't necessarily mean that people will keep maintaining them. So if Hazelcast is a company, then should we encourage them to actually maintain their own Kubernetes example repository in their own company area on GitHub?
I was thinking that if you're a company that builds something, runs on Kubernetes, you could probably just host that on your own GitHub. I was thinking about the repo I was talking about as being for people who work full-time on Kubernetes open source and whose primary job is to show how to do application integrations. They need a place to host stuff. It's not really an advertising space. So
I wonder how many people we have that works on the open source project and want to show people how to use Spark, Kafka, etc. Because ideally, we're kind of moving all these things to Helm charts, and I know a few people who are actively trying to work on that. And I don't know how many people actually want to keep maintaining these things, because most of these are basically not maintained. I clicked through every single one of them. Only a few of them are actually maintained in the past 6 months or so.
My question with Helm is like, is that really the right place to host like Go language code that needs to be built or images, make files and Docker files for images that are going to be included in them?
Not really for those. And source code and Docker files, they should have their own repository, also open source. You're totally right about that. We should have a separate thing for those people, probably an organization. Today's problem is that in the guidelines, we actually suggest people to send the guy their Docker file, and that person just builds the image and pushes to gcr.io/google-samples. That doesn't fit the requirements of the open source project. So I'm actually trying to move away from that and make the image build process more transparent. I guess an org will help in that case.
Is there an issue with just, I apologize, I've read through a little bit of your plan, but is there an issue with just moving everything that's in the examples subdirectory of the current repo and just migrating everything over to the new org? What are the issues there of just doing that? So we have all of this. I think there's a lot of good material in there as an example of, because otherwise what my concern is we have a large divide between very basic examples and just going into deep into Kubernetes documentation to figure out how to build an appropriate application using the direct APIs. And then there's this large chasm into Helm charts, right? And there's Helm isn't for everyone or for every use case. So I still think it's nice to have some of those tools in there, and more than just a simple guestbook application, just guestbook and a few of the examples there, because of the differences between how we might deploy those apps.
You're totally right. I think some of these are actually, I don't want to just delete them. That's why I think we should keep them here at least for a while and gracefully migrate them to another repository. The thing is that half of the stuff that you just described are actually in examples directory, and half of the other stuff are in the contrib repository, and there is kind of a lot of overlap between these two things. And as you said, most of these things are, they might be the only examples that actually show up on the search results today when I search, I don't know, Kubernetes and Spark. So we can move them somewhere. I'm just not sure where at this point. So if you have any ideas, feel free to chime in the doc, or definitely let me know if you have a preference.
Okay, we'll do. What is the defined difference then between contrib and examples?
Right now, I have no idea. Both are basically just they turned into a dumpster of projects. This says do not add new projects to this repository. I'm assuming that this doesn't accept a lot of PRs lately. And the other one is kind of in the same shape. I mean, they don't accept new content here as far as I know. So I don't know the historic difference. I think one of them used to have more like documentation type of things. Like this is how you run kubedns. This is how you run the dashboard. And over time, it changed.
Let's do a follow-up meeting and coordinate on the mailing list for people that are interested in this area, because it sounds like a longer discussion.
All right, sounds good.
If it's all right, I'd like to just chime in here with one last thing. I do like the way that the chart format allows you to like version things, and you don't necessarily have to use the values file. You can just put raw Kubernetes manifest in the templates directory. So I don't know. I think that would be interesting to explore an idea, and I understand that not everybody uses Helm, and that's totally fine. But explore the idea of having a repo which also contains like Helm charts that are not templated and just have the YAML file, because that way it makes it easier for a person to update and version and kind of keep track of like, this chart, which is not templated, these set of YAML files basically work on, this version of Kubernetes and so on. And there's like an automated way to make sure that happens. So I don't know, it's just a thought, and I know it doesn't fit the entire example and in the entire discussion we've had also, because there is a very valid case for having just YAML files, but I just want to throw that idea out there, and I'll just continue this discussion on the mailing list.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. Thank you all.
Okay, Eric, we touched on your topic in that last one that overlapped a bit. Do you have anything to add?
Nope, I'll follow up on the mailing list. A lot of good comments.
Okay, awesome. And does anybody have anything else for us today? That was it for the agenda. So any updates? Does anybody have any comments or anything like that? Feel free to chime in now.
This is Dan. I think the feature repo is closing today, I think. We pushed it back from last Wednesday to later tonight. So in case anyone still has anything that's going to GA or beta or alpha or anything like that, just add it to the feature repo.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. And we had some flakiness in one of the stateful set tests. Is anybody aware of anybody else working on that? Was Janet working on that, and she was working on the other flaky test. Eric, do you have any updates on that by any chance, or Dan?
In which test?
Stateful set. I can't remember the exact one, but I can pull it up.
Can you link it to me? So yeah, there's a cherry pick that's in progress for what version of Kubernetes?
Oh, let me just link you the issue. Just paste it. Oh, it looks like it's closed. Never mind, it got resolved.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, there's another issue, so we had to cherry pick that back onto 1.5 as well, and there's a PR open for that. I believe it's not in the submit queue. It will be soon. So.
Okay, thanks. So does that mean
I'm sorry, cherry pick it onto 1.6.
Oh, on 1.6. Okay. So it's Ken, right?
Yep.
Okay, yeah. So are you the point person for when we have like flaky tests in the workloads department?
I mean, I wouldn't say I'm the point person for open issue.
Yeah.
We can't have just one person that's responsible for tests. If you mean someone who can help distribute, that could be me or Ken, but it can't just be one person that fixes tests.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I just when these issues come in, I kind of get confused about who to ask or who to tag on those kinds of things. So
I am definitely willing to help route requests to the correct person.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Thank you. That's all I have.
Yeah, if that wasn't clear, I didn't mean to jump on you, Michelle. Just a general call out to everybody that we need more test fixing help, please.
Absolutely. So let's figure out how to do that, because I know that has to be frustrating. So let's figure out if there's anybody in the SIG who's willing to jump in on that as well. Okay. Does anybody have anything else? All right. Well, thank you so much, and see y'all next week.
Thanks.
Have a great week. Bye.